Croeso mawr i chi i'r sesiwn yma ar lesiant y gweithwyr yn y diwydiant creadigol. Warm welcome to the session. Thank you for joining us. During the next 45 minutes, we're going to discuss why worker well-being is good for the creative industry. I appreciate having Annabel Grundy and Keith Arrowsmith joining me on stage. Both work on the Workwise for Screen project, supported by the BFI, awarding National Lottery funding. I'm confident that everyone here, whether you're a freelancer, an employee or a company director, will benefit from learning more about Workwise's work. Annabel is a film, festival and cinema executive with over 20 years experience working in the independent film and screen sector. Keith qualified as a solicitor in 1995 and has since then worked with organisations across the cultural and creative sectors. He is Managing Director of multidisciplinary law firm Pro Arts Plus. If you look at the Workwise website, which I encourage all of you to do, they have numerous resources, advice and tips for encouraging well-being in the creative industry. Personally, working as a well-being facilitator, I'm always encouraged when the importance of well-being is highlighted and shared. As I said, this is a 45-minute session. Annabel and Keith will introduce themselves. Keith has a short presentation. I have a few questions before we open the floor to you. So over to you.
Shall I say, well, hello everyone, and thanks for inviting us here to the festival. I am Keith and I am a solicitor, so we just get that out in the open before we go any further. My first job when I was training was polishing the Oscars for David Lean's estate. And it's all gone downhill from there really, but what I've discovered is that I am useful looking at paperwork and bringing together all those complicated rules and regulations and applying them into the creative sector. The creative sector is my kind of happy space, and I love working with the people who are so passionate about what they do. The BFI asked us to lead on this project, Workwise for Screen, about 18 months ago as a pilot, which ends this month. But the good news is that there is funding to take it forward for the next 2-3 years. So if there's anything that you think we ought to be covering that we don't manage to touch on in the next 45 minutes, let us know before you disappear. And Annabel has been working with me to help make sure that we land all of this and bringing her wonderful expertise into our thinking.
Hi everyone. A little bit about me. I've done lots of different jobs in screen. I've worked in screen for more years than I care to mention. Most recently, I was an executive producer for Bradford UK City of Culture, looking after the entirety of that screen programme, from everything that was audience-facing to executive producing to documentary features and an immersive project. I've also run a charity, so the job I had before that was running Sheffield Dockfest with all of the sectoral stakeholders and institutional stakeholders, and then running a team that entailed. I've also worked in other film festivals in cinema and for the BFI setting up the UK Global Screen Fund. So I've worn lots and lots of different hats, and probably like many people in the room, I've flipped between being a freelancer and working in kind of more senior and institutional roles or with company responsibility. So I think I'm here to try to relate some of the policy into how that feels in practice.
There we go, thanks.
Nice to meet you.
As a brief introduction to the platform, it's an online resource. It's completely free for you to use, and it is fully checked to make sure it applies equally to Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and England. So I have experts here in Belfast, over in Edinburgh and Cardiff, who help make sure that everything we put on as resources are valid for you. We have struggled to find some of the language that's going to work across the sectors. We know that this stuff can be complicated. We know that sometimes we get buried in the detail and some of the language is a little bit technical, but we wanted to make sure that this was available at a time when I think all of us who are involved, especially in small businesses, can feel the pressure of dealing with kind of raft after raft of new rules, new regulations, new ways of doing things, new technology, more pressure on budgets and time. And the way that this is articulated across the nations is slightly different. So we have some places talking about fair work, other people talking about good work. So we've tried to find ways of bringing this all together as one basis so that you don't need to worry so much about whether you're crossing boundaries when you're working or whether someone has a different set of rules or responsibilities or obligations just because they happen to live somewhere else. But the main message from today is that we all operate in a world where there is risk, and what we need to do is find ways of feeling comfortable with the level of risk that you face. And it may be as someone, as a project lead, or as an HOD, or as a director of a company, or on a Tuesday you might be volunteering with a friend or on a freelance project. So if we can find a way of creating this space that makes sense to us, then we've got some chance of protecting our colleagues from harm. How have we done it? Well, there are some resources which are helpful if you haven't had to think about putting a project together before. How do you navigate all of this? That's up there already. And if there's anything that you think we've missed or needs more resource behind it, just let us know. But we also have codes of conduct, we also have example wording from contracts, we also have policies and procedures, all of which have been developed by industry experts, and I've helped to try and bring a level of language that keeps it all consistent for us. I also keep them all up to date, and even running the project for 18 months has meant that we've had to revisit some of the early work to make sure it's still right in June 2026. I was adamant that we needed to do things that were simple enough for me to be able to understand it and explain it. And I know that we've all only got 20 minutes to deal with anything that comes across our desks. So I said to the team, I need to write these on the back of a postcard, and that's exactly what they've done. So we've come up with a dozen, well 13, because I've added number 13 as contracts are important. But they're there for you to, I've got packs for everyone, so if you fancy taking one away with you to take back, grab one from me, or we can send one in the post. So there are these kind of physical resources as well, and there'll be more to come. So there's the little QR code that will be ready for you to log in and check out the rest of the resources. But before you do, and I'm going to ask for the lights to go up, if that's okay, because I just want to kind of just make sure that we're kind of working together on this one. And I'm going to ask just a bit of audience engagement. Watch out, this is immersive now. So I'm going to ask you all, if you like, to join in. Stand up or put your hand in the air for a second. You can do it as well.
Are we doing it together?
Yeah,
okay.
come on, I'll get the tech crew to stand up as well, because you know they're all there. Right. All I want you to do is stay standing, or stay with your hand in the air. If you can say that you've heard of this thing called CISA. So sit down if you've never heard of them.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, that's the end of the game. Right, isn't that interesting? So the Creative Industries Independent Standards Authority that's been going over a year and has written a code of practice that has been promulgated as the code for the whole of the creative industries that will become the basis of any whistleblowing or complaints process that they will be introducing in the next few months. None of us have heard of it. And I've had to spend some time reading those standards, and I can tell you today that they don't match up with the BFI standards or the BAFTA standards or the film and TV principles, and they don't match up with the latest rules and regulations that we have in relation to things like sexual harassment that have come in this year. So we've got, you know, we as an industry, we're all together in this. You're not unusual, and that's what I wanted to kind of say to everyone today, that it is complicated. We do have the resources that are there to help us, but we've got to find a way of giving ourselves permission to have the time and the energy to engage with it. Because I promise you, if you do spend a little bit of time thinking about it now, you'll save the risk of a complaint or a data protection subject access request or a whistleblower or a discrimination claim. And that's when you pick up the phone and end up spending time talking to someone like me. And here's the little pub quiz question. If someone ended up alleging that something had gone wrong with your team and wanted to take you to an industrial tribunal, an employment tribunal, the civil courts, I don't think you'll get a lot of change from £50,000–60,000. Yeah, that's the kind of scale of budget that we're talking about if something goes wrong. So what we're trying to do is give you the tools to make sure these things don't go wrong. But there we go. I think there's something really interesting about how, as a sector, we've been living with the BAFTA and the BFI principles since 2018, which haven't been updated since 2018. But the things that have been updated just haven't landed. But that's the world we're living in.
Really interesting. Thank you, Keith. Thank you. And that's quite an eye-opener because CISA have made quite a fuss, and they're obviously trying to encourage everybody to look at their standards, but they have an enormous amount of work to do as well. They don't have much resources and many people.
It's hard, yeah.
It's going to be...
I look at their work and other people in the sector. There's another regulator that looks after fundraising, especially of people in the not-for-profit sector. And they've been going for 5 years, and they've done the polling, and only 4% of the population have heard of them, and that's after 5 years. So it's early days, and I don't want to knock them for the wonderful work that they've done, but it's about that kind of how do we help us all cope with this constant change that's involved with running a business.
Well, my first question, Keith, you might have answered already.
We'll have a go.
Why did you want to introduce Workwise into the industry?
Yeah, well, part of it is a response to the government, because the UK government came up with this research that said the cultural sector has an issue with its workforce, and wanted to do something about it because government wants to keep people in work. Why wouldn't you want to keep people in work? And that's been backed up with other research from the Film and TV charity that says that a huge percentage of people have suffered in the workplace and have experienced harm. And there's a huge percentage of people who are just leaving because they just do not want to be facing those kinds of situations again. And that's a real drain. And why would we support an industry, says government, that hasn't got its own act in order? So there's a kind of policy push against it. But personally, I've experienced some of this when I was, before I went off to big challenge as a lawyer, and having seen it firsthand, having felt it firsthand, having had. My partner lost their job because of their sexuality. That's not much fun. And why can't we find ways of working that supports our colleagues rather than damages them? And I think we can. I don't think it takes very much, but it means a commitment. And the commitment might just be a few extra minutes to think about things, or a few extra minutes to hear some feedback, and making sure that there is an opportunity for people to give that feedback, or perhaps just a few minutes to just kind of let that land and tweak things for the future. So yeah, like all of life, lots of things happening that have all kind of come together in 2026 to see Workwise launch.
Brilliant, thank you. Annabel, as Keith was mentioning there, we're losing a lot of people in this industry. We have really long hours, we've got burnout, poor working conditions, low pay, job insecurity. What are the differences in the industry Workwise can do?
Big question. I think the thing that attracted me to the project was that when I've been in positions of responsibility previously, something like this didn't exist, and I really appreciated that the entire platform is about sharing resources and equipping people with the information that they need. So when you run a company and there are 10 of you or 5 of you, and you have to outsource your HR and you have to outsource a lot of professional functions, often the first time you think about these things is when there's a problem and you don't know where to start. So I really think that what Workwise is doing is trying to meet a gap in people's resources, both in the time that they have and the expertise inside the organisation, and then also saying, oh my God, it's really complicated. Here's a template that you can adapt, or here's a thought piece that actually is written for the screen sector and says, here's how some of the legislation around the ERA or requirements to be proactively anti-discrimination can apply to your business, because otherwise I'm sure lots of people in the room are really, really time poor, going, oh my God, I need to think about that, but I don't know where to begin. It feels horribly complicated and I don't have enough time to read the government paper on employment rights changing. And so we're trying to meet a gap and also very specifically not have it behind a paywall and not have the other barrier that is often there for a small business of I need to pay someone who knows what they're talking about to even have the questions that I need to ask. So yes, there are lots of really intersecting issues around pay and hours. There are also lots of organisations, unions, CISA, people presenting best practice. But I think that Workwise is trying to say, we're collating it in one place for you, and we're trying to make it real for the sector.
So this week we've just included a new article on the basis of a question that had been raised for us, saying for the first time we've got someone who on the team who's been accused of criminal activity, and we've got absolutely no idea what we need to do next. And it doesn't happen all the time, so why would we spend time thinking about it? But when it does happen, you know, there is a really difficult situation and people who are going to need some support. So by putting a little piece up there, which is only a couple of pages long, but to give people a bit of a steer, a bit of support through a really difficult management time to make sure that no one is damaged, no one is exposed to risk, and you have a way of complying with that multitude of rules and regulations and conduct standards and principles that can make sense when you've only got 20 minutes before your next shoot starts. It feels really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sorry, I know it's the first question. But I think there's also a power in this project because it's not politically driven. So it's not a union that is bound to represent its members, and it's not a lobby. It doesn't have a lobbying function. It doesn't have an advocacy function. It's much more of a supportive, not quite neutral, but kind of possibly kinder space.
I don't mind being called kind. That's unusual for a lawyer, but we'll go with that. The other thing we've been doing is training AI, because the thing we'd realised was lots of this great practice was behind a paywall. So it might be on Screen Skills' website, but if Screen Skills locks it away, then we can't train up ChatGPT. And if we can't train up ChatGPT, then when you and all go off and ask ChatGPT what the answer is, it's going to give you the answer that it feels most comfortable with from 1987. Well, that might not be appropriate. Or it might be something that's only equivalent rules and regulations from a different jurisdiction. So one of the things we've picked up very quickly was that we not only do we need us humans need to be comfortable with this, but we've also got to make sure that computers are happy too.
Would you say then that Workwise are you looking out for the employer or the employee?
Oh, one of my favourite questions, because it's even harder than that. It's even harder than that because I suspect there's very few people in the room that could explain to me the difference between employee, worker, freelancer, contractor, and we all wear those hats at different times of the day. And it's even worse than that because the rules are different in Northern Ireland and Scotland and Wales and England. And they're also different depending on whether you're talking about tax or discrimination law or whistleblowing law or health and safety or sexual harassment. So I went to a little library in Quebec last week, and the legislation there has a public access library, and it has a shelf. And on that shelf are all the definitions of all the legal words that they use in Quebec. And one of those volumes had employee in it. And that book had 100-odd pages giving me the definition of employee in their rules and regulations. So we don't take a view. We know that both employees and employers are going to be looking at our guidance, but our support is there for the business, on the basis that if the business gets it right, then everything else can flow from that.
Annabel, can you give examples of best practice? What does that look like in this industry? What would be the gold standard in best practice?
I think I can give you an example of a good practice, and how I approached this in the past. So I think really important things when you're thinking about workplace well-being and thinking about your team feeling safe and thinking about building trust is really some fundamental principles, which are parity, transparency and consistency. Those are really the things that people want, and they'll often put up with a lot as long as they feel that they're being treated fairly, not being treated differently to someone else, and therefore feeling safe. An example from my own personal work history, when I came into DocFest, which is a festival environment, working under really, really straitened circumstances, long hours, reliance on passion, all of the temporary workers, all of those things. We had very informal downtime practices after the festival that had sort of evolved over time and were there because everybody puts in so much work to make the thing happen. And I looked at that and I thought, this really isn't fair if you're a temporary worker, if you're part-time, or if you are new and you don't quite know how to interpret what work from home Friday means. Like, is that a day off, or is it actually please be available to me? It felt really inconsistent. And so I really formalised what we were doing, worked with our HR person, took a paper to trustees, said we need to implement 2 full office shutdowns post-festival so that everybody stops and no one can be under pressure to be delivering something. And it was really consistent and communicated to our stakeholders. I implemented a kind of allocation of toil that everybody got that was related to the additional days that you did in the festival rather than prorated. And again, with really clear times that people needed to take that. And then an additional, I was very generous, an additional 5 days of leave that was prorated if you were part-time, so that everybody felt that they were getting something back and that there was consistency. So I think, sorry, I'm very long-winded. Really, I would say you kind of need to have values and an understanding that each business is different. And I think I use that because I'm being specific to what the festival was like, what we were structured like. We had a very peak point, we had a lot of intensity, and then we needed to do something to make sure people could work on it year round. For a production company, that might be different. For a fund, that might be different. But I think look at where the pinch points are and look at what people need, and then look at whether the policy that you have is fair and actually is applied with parity.
There is a kind of underlining principle, which is, find those trigger points, find those things where it's high risk. And those risks will be different from, it might be project to project for the same business, or certainly from business to business. And if you can find those trigger points before they reach boiling point, then we've got a chance to spend some time and energy and being generous to ourselves. Just finding that time is valuable. It's not easy, but it's valuable. I think there's a difference between consistency, which is absolutely what we need, and being rigid. Yeah. And that kind of sense of, I might need something a little bit different to what you might need, and have we got that scope of flexibility within the way we work, and how we kind of express our values that starts landing and people appreciate it.
Yeah, that's why we had the shutdown and the time that people could use in the way that they wanted. And I think the other thing to say is, I made the point of doing the legwork and taking it through conversations with the team and through conversations with trustees, so that people felt that this had been socialised and was fair, because some people had loved every Friday, taken it as I get every Friday off, and they felt like something was taken away from them. But when you say, well, that doesn't work for the person who already didn't work on a Friday. Where's the support for them?
But that's a great lesson about what to do about feedback.
Yeah.
Because I think lots and lots of businesses just aren't ready to receive feedback. And it's a skill, and we're not taught it. And all of a sudden, we've got someone who's really upset, wanting us to know what's happened and asking, what are you going to do about it? And again, if you're not used to those kind of conversations, it will feel really awkward. And you won't want to do anything that makes it worse, but sometimes doing nothing makes it worse. So having that kind of way of talking to people feeling comfortable enough to share that kind of information with you is really helpful, but needs work, and you need to keep reinforcing it. You can't just say at the start of the project, hi, I'm Keith, if you want anything, I'm over there. Because people won't come over there, they won't know you, they won't trust you, won't have that kind of relationship that we need to build up for people to have those really important conversations. So you have to keep reinforcing it. You have to keep coming back to it and asking, is it still working?
Yeah.
What we were doing last week might be fine this week, but it might not be ready for June the 19th when the data protection laws all change again. And it's that kind of sense of consistency, but flexibility, and that kind of ability to keep change at the heart of what you're doing, so you're not surprised.
I think there's something in there also about role modelling. So if you're a senior person in an organisation and you've done this work on creating this policy, and then you work through all of your holidays, you're sending a message to your team that that's actually what the culture is.
I promise I wasn't working all through my Canada holiday last week. Promise.
But that's a really important point, isn't it? You have to show and people, this is how we're working. And as
you say, there's often the way that when you look at all those kind of big press stories about things that have gone horribly wrong in the sector, often it's someone at the top of the tree that's been allowed to behave badly. Somehow that message hasn't gone all the way up to the top. And then they haven't modelled good behaviour and they've been allowed to get away with it because they're top of the tree. That's not acceptable.
You're mentioning laws there.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, employment laws.
Yeah.
And employment rights in the UK. Are we aware? Will the Workwise website help us with this? So
it is maintained. So as each new part of the regulations comes into force, we take that on board and we try and, when we know the timetable, we'll make sure it's there so people can prepare in advance. The Employment Rights Act, which is the latest piece of legislation, is being brought in stage by stage, and some of it doesn't apply in Northern Ireland, and some other rules and regulations don't apply across all of the countries. So it is sophisticated as an approach. So we've got things like sick pay, and those kind of rules and regulations that are in place already. They're starting to think about 0 hours contracts now. There are some things that have been left because they're too complicated. We might come back and have better descriptions of what we mean by worker status and employee status, but that seems to have been kicked into the long grass. So I think that's a really good example of things changing. I think people think lawyer and they think Charles Dickens and quill pens. And it's not far off, actually. Some of my conveyancing firms, I think, are using rules and regulations from way back when. And the Partnership Act of 1893 is still going, thank you very much. But, over this last few weeks, we've had new rules coming in on sexual harassment and another set coming in soon. We've got a data protection rule that says you must publish a data protection policy for the public to access. And if you don't, you're in breach. And by the way, we're raising the amount of fine that you might experience to amounts that none of us can afford to pay. So, it's a constant stream of new things that are on the horizon. And it might be for employment, but I don't want to focus on that because we're in an industry that pretends that there aren't many employees. So I think these other rules around health and safety, around data protection, around anti-discrimination, they apply to everybody. And if we get those right, and we get the contracts and those conversations right, the odds are the employment rules will be compliant anyway.
I feel like we should do another who's heard of the Employment Rights Act?
There is that kind of feel. It's one of those that's been around and about, but because it's being brought in peaceful, because I don't know what's in force and what's still planned. Google certainly doesn't. When I ask it, I get 3 different answers from 3 different AI chatbots. So there is this is the problem, that when we decide to set ourselves up in business, especially for a small business owner, this is the burden of rules and regulations we are expected to know. And the trouble we have is that we have kind of developed the kind of more American way of dealing with issues, which is shout about it on social media, and we run that risk, that reputational risk now, if things aren't quite right. And in a way that's great news, because why should someone get away with it if they're not following the rules and regulations? But on the other hand, it means as a business owner, you know, I feel that weight on my shoulders. And if we haven't got friends, if we haven't got colleagues, if we haven't got resources, if I'm not kind to myself and say, it is impossible to know what all these rules and regulations say today, it's impossible to keep in touch with all of them all of the time and run a business, then we're going to end up doing damage to ourselves as well. So we've got to be kind. We've got to find ways of being kind.
That's lovely to hear. I think that would help a lot of people in this industry, just people being kind to each other. We've got over 10 minutes left. I'm really keen to hear questions that are important to you. So Ed here has a microphone. If you have any questions, I'd really appreciate if you want to say your name or and ask any questions you'd like. Thank you.
Hi, it's Laura from Screen Cornwall. I'm interested in how to grow really competent producers who will then run companies, and I guess I'm interested in the bit before you start a company and how you learn this stuff through, whether it's university or making short films, in a way that is manageable for the stage of career you're at, but prepares you for the reality of doing it as a proper business when you get to that point.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because there's so many ways into the industry, and lots of people are coming in at all different times of life with lots of different sorts of experience under their belt. And I think one of the problems we have is that people forget that there is that kind of all those sorts of different levels in play at any one time, and the way of people work changes over time as well. So I think there is a responsibility with us as business owners to find ways of embedding it. There are people within the BFI and other funders, the broadcasters, the streamers, who try and make sure that there are ways in for people like apprentices to make sure that they've got that support in place. But I was in Cardiff a few weeks ago, hearing the story where one apprentice ended up not coming into work one day because there was no transport for them. But they hadn't felt that they'd got permission to raise that the day before. They didn't know who to talk to. They felt as though they had got nowhere to turn, and because their mum couldn't bring them into work that day, they Googled it and told their boss it was a force majeure. There were circumstances beyond their reasonable control, and that's why they stayed in bed that day. And that's a failure of the business. That's not the young person's fault at all. It's a problem that I hear, and to reassure everyone, I've gone back all the way back to the 1980s, and everyone was worrying about how do we look after the next generation of filmmakers, in the last financial crash. It's not a new issue. And I think the likes of those bodies, the likes of the education bodies, the likes of people like Film London who run these kind of schemes, Creative UK who run them for the regions. There's a new piece of funding that's been made available for the other nations from the BFI that I don't think I've seen the notice on who's actually been awarded the cash yet. But there are schemes and will be schemes. There'll always be schemes, but they don't join up. So if we can find these kinds of forums where people can hear what those the reality of working in the sector might be, we've got some chance that then filters through into those people with those kind of responsibilities. But it's not just about young people. Part of the government's research says older people, to keep them in the sector, need that kind of support to develop their resources in a way that is relevant to the working practice of 2026. Yeah, it's a hard one, isn't it? You had loads of volunteers at DocFest.
We did have loads of volunteers. We had lots of really young people as well. We were often people's first or second job. I think there's a real responsibility for leaders and managers to really think about the level of confidence that young people have when they're coming into your organisation. They might have gone through university and have a lot of knowledge, but what they lack often is experience, and what they lack often is confidence. And I think making room and making an environment that feels safe enough for someone to make a mistake or to say that they haven't understood can be really, really valuable. Think about things like, I'm sure lots of people in the room already do this, but buddying up. So if you've got someone new coming in and they've got a really busy, stressed manager, think about someone who maybe did the job before or someone who's at a closer level to them. I used to quite often do that and pair people up and say, can you just take them out for coffees? And it's often that sort of informal learning that I think people need. And that the thing I wanted to say, my last point, sorry, I'm rambling on. The more senior you get in an organisation, the louder your voice is, even if you think you're whispering. So you really have a responsibility to really think before you act and to really try to model best practice. And it can be so powerful just to make room for someone, or just to say, have you understood, or did you want to have a chat, or to clock that it's happening and maybe they need to talk to somebody else. Yeah, it can be really important.
And that's part of when you're not doing this, Marian, that's part of what you help
Yes,
with.
exactly. I work as a wellbeing facilitator, and just being there sometimes to listen to people, and they know they can ask me some things they might not be able to ask the production. Yeah. Lots of freelancers are very wary of admitting or asking something. Yeah. So having somebody neutral on set can make a difference. And yes, I think that just being there for people to be able to ask those difficult questions and listening, I think, is really important.
Yeah, there's something about that kind of rehearsal process, isn't there? Where you're bouncing it off of somebody. And I think that's the same for us, who are leading small businesses, because we might be facing a situation we've never experienced before, and it feels quite lonely. That kind of stuff. If you're facing that kind of issue with a young person that's just without your knowledge, where do you go with those kind of issues before they become something that becomes harder to tackle? So I keep coming back to this, just giving yourself a little bit of time to rehearse these things through, checking them through. It might be an official risk assessment, but it might be just, okay, there's some new rules out about sexual harassment. Let's just think about some of the language, some of the things that might arise. What are the kind of pinch points? What are the kind of trigger points that might be something I need to deal with in the next few weeks?
Did we answer your question?
We've rounded a bit. There's plenty more to say about it. But keep an eye on the BFI, because they ought to be announcing their funding for that as that a particular level of support within the nations.
Hi. So I'm from south of the border. I'm from Ireland, working in Dublin as a film producer, television producer primarily. And I just wanted to very briefly mention Safe to Create, which is the system in the Republic of Ireland. Yeah. It's a scheme that I was involved in the design of and the early implementation of. And it is a scheme that involves training. It also has a sister scheme called Minding Creative Minds, which is 12 hours of support, mental health support, provided by the state through an organisation called Minding Creative Minds that starts in the first instance in the music business and then has spread across all the arts. But in Safe to Create, it's now become a government-backed initiative. And the expression of that is that in our tax credit, Section 481, you cannot get the tax credit until it's now 90% of all participants, all workers, everybody, I go beyond workers, everybody on the show that's getting 481 has to do the 3 training schemes that are online. If anybody wants to see what those schemes are, they're on Screen Ireland, host them as part of Screen Skills, and there's one on bystander training, there's one on unconscious bias, and there's one on anti-bullying in the workplace.
Brilliant.
And around that, they run a whole pile of working schemes around training. And the big issue, as you've just said, is how to, on any one shoot over a 10-week period, how to actually address issues. And for people to feel that their issues can be addressed, even with the training, even starting that.
Yeah, and I think it's even more complicated for some of those shoots, because even if it's a 10-week shoot, it doesn't mean to say all of those people start on day one. They'll be coming and going throughout the 10. So whatever we set up has got to be able to cope with that kind of stuff. I've been trying to make sure that what happens within the screen industries in the UK learn not just from what's happening in the UK, but from further afield. So we have experience from a similar board in Utrecht. There's similar work happening in Australia. There's similar work happening in Canada, but it all feels slightly disjointed. We've also got work that's happening in other bits of the creative industries, and also other businesses that have a high turnover of freelancers. So the construction industry, for example, and they deal with their training and their young people in a way that's very, very different to the screen sector. So there's all these opportunities for us to pause and think, are we doing it in the best possible way with the resources that we've got? And can we learn from all these other examples before the next disaster strikes? So thanks for bringing those to our attention.
It's essentially, it's the gig economy and precarity, and it doesn't really matter
what the
sector is.
That's a lot of the government's push, saying it's more about small businesses and gig economy than it happens to be someone that's creating a film or an animation or something that's so specific against that. But then we have other people saying we need our freelance champion. And that has to be special for the creative sector, because freelancers here are very different to the others. So we don't even have a sense of what's the best thing to do between all of those support bodies. So I think we make the most of it with what we can.
Thank you for sharing that information. And also for everyone, the Film and TV charity, and they have sessions there which you can call them, and there's a 24-hour helpline. Call It app as well if you're working on a production, and people can anonymously use the website to, if they want to engage or let you know what's happening on a certain production. So there are many institutions and websites there to help everyone.
We've got 30, 40 all linked up, and they're all maintained and up to date. And Wales have been doing some really good work on that facilitation set up, haven't they? And proved across a large number of productions that having that resource available, funded through the Welsh Government, has been a real asset for each of those businesses. So yeah, it's about how do we get government to fund, because we've all got limited budgets, and we need to find ways of making sure that we've got the resource available.
I think maybe we have time for one more question.
Yeah, well, we'll talk quick.
Yes, a quick question.
A quick answer.
Hi, thanks. Gavin Halpin from Paper Films. I think tools for guidance and decoding legislation are always useful, but the reality for me and my peers is that there's quite a low threshold before you actually need an expert or a solicitor or whatever, if things get serious. So I'd like to actually go back to like the well-being aspect of this panel. And Annabel, I was just really interested in how you put your bunny ears up whenever it was like work at home Fridays, which became like an unofficial well-being day or whatever that became, that you sought to formalise, because the junior members of your team actually didn't really know what it meant. We have employees who would have graduated in a lockdown, got their first job in a lockdown. I work in animation, so it's mainly computer office based. We are now back in the studio. We have a hybrid work policy. There's office days and home days, and that does, all designed from a well-being point of view, but it does create management challenges. So I'm just wondering how you navigate that on a kind of person-to-person management, line management level.
You go first.
Okay, yeah, I'll go first. I think we also adapted work from home because times had changed. So it had been in place pre-pandemic, and I think work from home meant something different pre-hybrid times. I think you have to, often you need to meet people where they're at. It's difficult, isn't it? HR is really difficult. It's really complicated because human beings are complicated as well. And yes, it can be more convenient to work from home if you know what you're doing and you've got 15 years of experience and you never get any time to yourself. It can be really, really valuable. The flip side of that is it can be really challenging if it's your first job and you're 21 and you don't know who to ask and you can't see whether your manager is busy or not to even be able to get time with them. So there isn't really one system, I guess. What was your question? Sorry, was it just how do we navigate the complexity of all of this, or was it? Yeah, I think agreed office days are helpful. I think collective agreements with your team, and actually, if you have capacity to do it, talking to people about how they prefer to work. So for me, I really, really need quiet time, and I'm really protective of my quiet time because I need to think. And there might be someone else who says, I need to be around people, I need to verbalize to be able to get my ideas out. But even having that conversation or generating that conversation in your team can get people thinking about it and saying, what do you need? Again, you have to fit your work to your business. It's complicated, but I think if you come from principles of fairness and principles of people having the tools that they need, then you're probably on the right track. Yeah, it's easy to get bogged down in policy, and the application of the policy is the really tricky bit.
Yeah, my top tip would be beware the policies, because if you've got one, you're going to have to follow it. And most people's policies aren't up to date because they don't have the time and energy to keep them up to date, or they become so complicated that no one understands them, or they use language that people don't understand, or no one knows where to find the latest one. So that becomes its own machine. So I'm often working with small businesses, and the first thing that we do is just simplify it down to a set of policies and procedures that everyone knows and can continually signpost. And so I've got most of my policies down to one, which is just a dignity at work policy. And it has that common thread and that common understanding, which we can all understand, and then we can build those specific things on it.
Yeah, and as a leader, I said to you in a conversation earlier today, some of the best advice I had was, if you're thinking about policy, think about the level of effort and complexity in policing it. Yeah. Think about how it would actually be applied, and that will often tell you whether you need it or not. So I think, you need policies around things like fair pay and maternity leave and discrimination and the things that are really, really high risk, but don't get bogged down thinking you need a policy for absolutely every eventuality.
We need
the
end.
The end, sorry.
And I was going to say, communication. Yes, you're welcome to come down and have a chat with us because we're running out of time. And I would say just good communication. Speak to your employees and listen to them as well can be a big help. Thank you to our panel tonight. Thank you today, and to the viewers audience. I hope you've learned something, and hopefully the Workwise website will be really useful to most of you. And you will encourage other people as well to have a look at the website. Any questions, feel free to come down and have another word with us. Thank you very much. Thank you.